Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. Really glad you could join me today out here in the vegetable garden. My oh my, it's a beautiful day the Lord has provided. We've had like 5 days of rain here lately in Pennsylvania, Zone 6, so it's just so lovely to see the sun shining today. Well, anyhow, today I wanted to share with you 8 quick tips on how to grow healthy tomatoes in your vegetable garden. So thanks for joining me today. Well, tomatoes are one of my wife and I's favorite vegetables out in the garden. In fact, we're waiting with great anticipation for that first ripe tomato. If you're a gardener, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyhow, you know, I've grown all kinds of tomatoes here in the garden, and I've had a lot of great successes with growing my tomatoes. And so today I just wanted to share with you some of my quick tips on how to grow tomatoes. And I'm going to share them with you over there on my outdoor garden structure. So follow me along. Well, this sure is a beautiful time of the year. You know, the birds are singing their praises, the leaves are unfurling from the trees, and the wildflowers are blooming in the garden and in the woods. And so it's just a beautiful time of the year here in Pennsylvania. You know, the gardens come out of hibernation. I've gotten most of my plants all in the garden, and so now it's just a matter of nurturing and caring for them. And you know, I've been gardening for over 25 plus years, and you know, one thing I've learned about life and gardening itself is that it's one big learning curve, you know, full of trials and errors, experiments. And so, you know, I've been the type of person that when I want to learn something, I really jump in head first and spend a lot of time reading and studying and then going out and doing what I've learned. And so I've always loved learning and enjoy gardening. And so, you know, with these quick tips, hopefully it'll give you a good start to growing vegetables in your garden. And so quick tip number 1 would be wait till it's warm outside. In other words, tomatoes, they don't tolerate cold weather. You know, you want to make sure your last frost is passed in your area. In fact, you could even wait a week, you know, before you plant out in your garden, just to be on the safe side. I've been to Walmart, you know, off and on during the last couple months, and you know, one thing I noticed is that they're out selling their peppers and tomatoes, you know, in like middle of April. You know, I'm thinking, what are they selling them for? You know, they're gonna, even your first light frost is gonna kill them. And so you really want to make sure that your last frost date is passed. Tomatoes like warm feet. And my 18-foot by 30-foot garden over there, I use a 4 or 6 mil black plastic. I also grow my peppers in there too, and you know, the black plastic warms the soil up early in the season. It suppresses the weeds. It holds in the soil moisture. I've done a few videos on how you can install that in your garden, but to me it's a mulch. You know, a mulch is something that lays on top that suppresses the weeds and holds in the soil moisture and so on. But it's just been a win-win situation for me. So tip number 2 would be tomatoes like a lot of sun. So you want to make sure you provide at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight for your tomato plants. The more the better. So you may want to go out in your garden if you're just beginning to have a garden and just look at the sun and time how much sun hits in certain areas, because you want to make sure that anything with a root or fruit gets a good 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. A root or fruit like your carrots, your potatoes, your peppers, tomatoes, melons, and so on. And so they like a lot of sunlight. Your leafy greens can get away with 4 to 6 hours of sunlight. Here in my gardens, most of my plants get a good 8 hours of sunlight, and so the more sunlight they get, the healthier they're going to be. If you plant tomatoes in an area or peppers or something with a root or fruit that's not getting the recommended sunlight, they're going to just be limpy, unhealthy looking plants, and they're going to struggle to really produce any type of fruit. Tip number 3 would be tomatoes like a good, well-drained, fertile, rich soil. In other words, you want a nice, healthy soil. Remember that, throughout the garden season, your plants, the root system, they take up nutrients from the soil. And so it really depletes the soil of any type of nutrients. That's why, you constantly want to be replenishing your soil with nutrients. Or at the end of the season, you could add leaf compost or different amendments to your soil, so it replenishes your soil with all those nutrients. It's just like us human beings. The healthier food we put in our body, the healthier we're going to be. And it's the same with the nutrients in your soil. You want to treat the soil, make your soil healthy. As a result, you'll have nice, healthy plants. You could add compost to your existing topsoil, or worm castings are great, or leaf mulch is great. Here in my gardens, I use a composted leaf mulch that's amended with topsoil. I get that locally from Barnside Compost. I actually did a video showing my compost delivery, but it's actually a certified weed-free compost, so I don't have to be constantly weeding out in my garden. Tomatoes are also heavy feeders, so if you fertilize out in your garden, it's like for me, I use alfalfa pellets, and I go through my garden beds about 1 month before the season starts, and I add 1 to 2 inches or sometimes 3-inch layer of my compost to my beds, and then I'll rake in some of my alfalfa pellets, which will give it time for them to start breaking down. Tip number 4 would be make sure you provide proper spacing for your tomato plants. Now here in my gardens, I provide around 24 inches apart from my plants, and the rows are about 36 inches apart. You just want to make sure that you provide plenty of air circulation around your plants, because if you don't, it could promote disease of some kind. And also provide wide enough rows, like 36 inches, maybe even a little bit more, depending on the size of my plants. My tomato plants get pretty full, and so it's nice to have like at least a 3-foot walkway between them so you can pick the fruit from your plants. Tip number 5 would be, when you go out to buy your tomato plants, check your labels. Read them carefully. They'll give you some information on what size tomato it's going to be. Also, what's important is the tomato plant that I'm buying. Is it going to be a determinate type tomato plant or an indeterminate? Now, the determinate type is a bush type tomato, and I grow both varieties in my garden. But the determinate type is a bush type tomato, where most of the tomatoes will set at all at once. I have some Mountain Spring tomatoes, some Plum Crimson tomatoes, some Amish Paste tomatoes, and I use a lot of them for canning. So that fruit's going to set pretty much within a couple weeks of the season, and so it makes it really convenient for canning. And for those type of bush tomatoes, I just provide a metal tomato cage, which, you know, they're easy to install. Once and done, I can get around them and harvest tomatoes from, and they just really work out well. And then if you install or plant the indeterminate tomatoes in your garden, they can get anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. They're going to grow right up to your first frost. And so once my determinate or bush type tomatoes are finished growing, I'll still have my indeterminate tomatoes to harvest from. And so, but you do want to make sure you provide trellises for those indeterminate type tomatoes. I've also done videos on you can prune the tomatoes, how they grow, and one of my favorite tomatoes is the Sun Gold Cherry tomato, and I grow those up my cattle panel trellises. I've also done a video on how you can install those for under $45, but I just love the cattle panel trellises here in our PlantSmartLiving gardens. Tip number 6 would be, tomatoes will root along its stem, and so what you can do is you can actually break the first couple leaves, or branches I call them, on your tomatoes and bury them deeper. Now some of my seedlings or transplants were only 6 inches high, so maybe I broke off the first branch or two and then just planted it a little deeper. But if some of your tomato plants you buy may be a foot tall, or those ones that you've grown yourself maybe a foot tall, you can actually, again, break off the first couple leaves or branches, and then you can actually bury the whole root system on an angle. And that way, being that the tomato plant will root along its stem, it's just going to provide a much healthier, stronger plant for you, because the root system is going to be much larger. Therefore, it's going to be able to take up more nutrients from the soil, resulting in just a healthier, larger plant that's going to produce more tomatoes. And tip number 7 would be that you want to provide support for your tomatoes. Whether it's a metal tomato cage. I actually end up buying them from Ray's Greenhouse. They're like between $5 and $6 a piece, but they're a good heavy-duty tomato cage. And what's nice, at the end of the season, they just stack up on top of each other, and they're easy to store. But the heavy ones, they're like a 1/4 inch diameter almost, the metal on those. And so, they last me for years, but they're just quick and easy and simple. You may spend a little bit more money in the beginning buying these tomato cages, but they're going to last you for years. And so, and then if you need to provide a trellis, the cattle panel trellis is good for your indeterminate vining tomatoes that will grow anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. Also wooden trellises I use in my garden. And so you just want to make sure that you do provide plenty of support for your tomatoes. And tip number 8 would be, make sure you provide plenty of water for your tomato plants. Now, what you want to do is make sure you water maybe 1 to 2 inches per week, depending on the area, your area, and depending on how hot it is. But you want to make sure you deep water, because that way if you provide about 1 to 2 inches of water per week, it's going to promote deep roots for those plants. If you water more often per week, it's going to cause those roots perhaps to grow shallower for you. So, when you deep water, or a slow drip system, the water just ends up permeating deeper into the soil. And I also water my plants late in the afternoon, a couple hours before the sun goes down, because it still gives the water on your plants a chance to evaporate and dry. But I wait till late afternoon, Because what happens if you water early in the morning and then that hot sun comes up, it's just going to evaporate that water right out of your soil. So I always encourage gardeners to think about watering late afternoon if they have that ability at their house. And so I would say if you follow these 8 quick tips on how to grow healthy tomato plants in your garden, you should be off to a good start. And so if you have any questions or comments about this video, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And you can also visit us at PlantSmartLiving.com. And there you can learn more about gardening and also how you can reclaim and restore your health by adopting a whole food, plant-based, vegan lifestyle. And you know, that's the one beauty about growing our own vegetables in our garden, is that, you know, they're just packed full of nutrients. You know, it's a whole food, they're organic, they don't have to travel 1,500 miles to a supermarket, you know, where they just lose a lot of nutrients. And also then we can control, you know, the quality of the food. We know that there's no pesticides on the food. You know, growing our own food also brings us back to our very roots, you know, to the earth itself. You know, we have the wonderful privilege to take a little teeny tiny seed, you know, which is a living embryo, although it's in a dormant stage, but, you know, you plant that in some nice rich soil, you provide water and plenty of sunlight, and then we have the blessing of nurturing and caring for this plant as it matures and just produces massive amounts of produce for us. My hope here at Plant Smart Living is to help everyone find their inner farmer and to teach them and show them how easy gardening can really be, even if you're just growing your plants in containers on your back deck or patio. You know, once you understand a few growing principles, it's really not something that's that difficult. You may spend a little bit more money in the beginning of your season and to outlay some, you know, money for raised garden beds and providing soil in your beds and tomato cages. But, you know, once you have that money outlaid, you know, it's most of the time after that you're just going to be buying plants which really aren't that expensive. Well, anyhow, I just hope you have a wonderful day and a bountiful garden season. So until next time, this is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred.